In a totally unrelated event earlier in 1980, the American government withdrew their athletes from the Olympic Games in Moscow, USSR, in protest against the invasion of Afghanistan by the USSR. It was the second incursion of politics and international diplomacy in sport at that level. The tradition of deploying boycotts at the world's biggest, most powerful and prestigious games to drive causes beyond and outside the games themselves had been well established in 1976. At the Montreal Olympics that year, 27 African countries had boycotted the games on the eve of the opening ceremony. The devastating impact on the games makes Montreal 76 the worst Olympics in history. There was a huge difference in how the protagonists of the 1976 and the 1980 boycotts treated the innocent athletes who were used as pawns on both occasions to support global causes outside sport. The athletes gave up 4 years of hard work and preparation, dreams of Olympic medals and profitable careers, and all the lifetime rewards and awards that could have come from being Olympic heroes. It was a big sacrifice to make. The President of the United States in 1980, Mr. Jimmy Carter, invited the American athletes to the White House, feted them, and decorated them as patriots and heroes. To this day, the USA athletes are still regarded as Olympians in the United States of America. Think about it. The athletes did not participate in the 1980 games, yet they were treated like winners. It was a lesson lost on the greater heroes and patriots from 27 African countries that were forced earlier in 1976 to surrender their dreams and careers on the altar of politics and diplomacy. At the directives of their governments, the athletes did not participate in the Montreal Games, the Supreme Council for Sports in Africa, that were instrumental to the boycott and that handed down the directives to the athletes in Montreal to boycott, did not have any plans to take care of the athletes after the boycott. They left the athletes in limbo to burn in the pain and anguish of lost opportunities and shattered dreams. The individual countries involved, led by Nigeria and Tanzania, also did nothing for the athletes following their sacrifice. The countries forgot to reward, to recognize, to celebrate, to honor, and even to compensate them for paying the ultimate price in sport. The athletes retired into the cocoon of other interests, dreams becoming nightmares for most of them, opportunities lost forever, windows of fame and fortune shut in their faces. They were forgotten, neglected, frustrated, and angry. Those that have died did so unsung. For most of the other surviving athletes involved, for 47 years since that day of July 17, 1976, the pain of their disappointment and loss has refused to go away. It is only now, a few months ago, that some of them have started to heal with better understanding of the impact of their uncommon and painful sacrifice in 1976. Former African-American ambassador to the United Nations, Andrew Young, was the first to drive home the significance of the 1976 Games boycott by Africa. the rich social and political harvests of that action. Had the African athletes not boycotted the games, the racist apartheid system of governance in South Africa may have continued for several more years or decades than it did. Had the African athletes not boycotted the games, one of the most respected and most revered African leaders of all time, Nelson Mandela, may have remained behind bars on Robben Island longer than the 27 years he spent. Had the African athletes, supported by athletes from Iraq and Guyana, not boycotted the games, Nelson Mandela may never have become the first Black president of South Africa and commenced Black rule in that African country. He may have been too old. Had African athletes not boycotted the games in 1976, the whole of Africa would not have lined up willingly several decades later behind South Africa to become host of the first World Cup in Africa in 2010. There are other benefits that came out of that boycott, and these are all huge prizes secured by the huge prices paid. So what do you do with the athletes that made that sacrifice, that were used as pawns by governments? Athletes that did not participate at all in the Olympic Games through no fault of their own, but in support of a cause to which they had no say, only sacrifice. Is what to do to forget the athletes? To let them go back to their homes with memories of lost opportunities and wasted lives, individually bearing the consequences of their involuntary action? In the past few months, there has been a little consolation for the athletes across Africa, and particularly in Nigeria. They now understand better the good that came out of their involuntary sacrifice. It lessens their pain a little. For such lofty goals, for their race and for Africa, any sacrifice would not have been considered too much. So, Nigeria is preparing to do something for the Nigerian athletes. The country is drinking from the lessons of Barcelona 92 that says at the Olympic Games, you do not have to be forced to be a winner. And from the American treatment of their 1980 heroes who did not participate in the Olympic Games of Moscow, and yet we are treated as heroes, they raised the bar of Olympism. In the statement, at the Olympic Games, you do not have to participate to be a winner. Nigeria, through the vision and effort of the Nigeria Institute of International Affairs and the munificence of a Nigerian patriot and philanthropist, and the collaboration of the Federal Ministry of Sports, and the support of several organizations in the country, would be setting new standards for other countries, particularly South Africa, and the African Union to follow. After July 28, 2023, when 45 Nigerian athletes involved in that boycott in 1976 will be resurrected, will be reunited, will be recognized, will be decorated, will be celebrated, rewarded, and immortalized, it will be an eye-opener for all, including the South African government and people, to also show appreciation to the athletes from 27 African countries that gave up their lives and careers for South Africa to achieve freedom. The Supreme Council for Sport in Africa must do something to immortalize the entire African athletes. The African Union must honor and reward them. The governments of the different countries involved in the boycott must fit them, must celebrate them, must appreciate them, and possibly even reward them for heeding their country's call and changing the world. Nigeria is bailing the cart and taking the lead in this restitution. the unsung and forgotten heroes of the 1976 boycott of the Olympic Games will be reunited again in Lagos, Nigeria, after 47 years in an unprecedented celebration on July 28, 2023. Watch out. It is going to be the first step in a long march to the unification of the Black race. Remember what Professor Patrice Lumumba said. Africans must find a way to come together, to unite, or they will perish. When we come back, we shall be meeting my two guests today. Brothers, they were twin brothers, but from different mothers. One sitting comfortably in his home in the UK, a Nigerian Briton, and the other also sitting comfortably in his home in South Africa, I guess Johannesburg. We shall be meeting both of them when we come back from this break.
This is Eagle 7 Sports Radio, 103.7 FM.
Welcome back. My guests are here and they are waiting. From London, I have my own brother as well. He's a barrister. He's an author of incredible books, one of which is titled The Slave Ship Called Jesus. Once you see that book, you have to read it, man. You have to. He's a social, a cultural, and a political activist of the highest order. We come from the same school. Dele Ogun, good morning.
Good morning, Chief. Good morning, my brother. It's such an honor to be here in conversation with my big brother, my idol, my football idol.
Wow. Stop that, Dele. Stop that, Dele. We have a big guest in the house. Stop that.
A bigger guest, yes.
We have a big guest in the house.
My big brother.
And he has adopted your name.
Can I have the honor of introducing him?
Okay, you can. Okay, go ahead.
Greats. We call ourselves namesake. This is my brother from another mother, Dr. Biki Minyuku. For those of you who have not heard of him before, this is the patron of the Fatherland Group that I founded. You've all heard of Fatherland Group, but the patron, the guiding pilot mind is Dr. Biki Minyuku. And very briefly, he's a graduate, BA Economics from the University of the North, Limpopo, in South Africa. And he also has an MSc in Economics from the University of Cardiff, and the unique distinction of going back and becoming Vice Chancellor of that esteemed University of the North in Limpopo. More to the point, as far as this conversation is concerned, he was a former Chief Executive Officer of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, South Africa's Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which birthed the new republic. So thank you for the privilege of introducing my soulmates, Dr. Biki Minyuku. Thank you, Chief.
Incredible, Dele, incredible. And let's welcome Dr. Biki Dele Ogun Minyuku. Good morning, Doctor.
Good morning. I hope you can hear me. So
very clearly. We can hear you very clearly.
Chief, if many people do not know that if you're a brother to my brother, you're also my brother. The only difference is that Dele is my namesake as well. And thank you for the welcome. Thanks, my namesake. And I listened to your editorial. And it's really indicating that everybody is a winner, and you're a winner as well. And many South Africans would remember computer Maria Lamula in South Africa. They don't know much about mathematics in Nigeria, and that's you, sir. Thank you.
Wow. You're welcome. You're welcome, my brother. Well, how are we going to structure this morning's conversation? In my introduction, Dele did not hear that, I believe. I said that there is an emerging new world order. And Professor Lumumba, the renowned legal luminary from Kenya, said that Africa has to unite. Africa must have a common front. As individuals, the countries are too weak, the people are too weak. If we do not unite, Africa will perish. The unification of Africa is very, very important. And the foundations of that unification were laid a long time ago, but not sustained. One of those moments and one of those years, very critical years, is 1976 in the history of Africa as a whole, in the history of mankind as a whole. 1976 is very, very significant, particularly for us in Africa. In Nigeria, remember that was the year we had two heads of states. In 1975, we had Yakubu Gowon, who left. Then Murtala Muhammad came up. And then we had Olusegun Obasanjo, very strong heads of states. And Nigeria was the richest and most powerful black nation on earth. We were awash with money. Far from South Africa, we were. But we were a frontline state in the struggle against the worst form of racism, which is apartheid in South Africa. And in South Africa itself, if we recall, which was known to all of us who were young in those days, that was the year of the Soweto uprising, when students were shot at by police because they were protesting. And they went into one church, which became world famous. I think it was called Regina or something, that church. And that was where they shot the first student and killed him. The police shot and killed him. And the students won that struggle. That was the year that we went to the Olympics, when all of those crises were happening in South Africa. In June, the crisis happened in South Africa in June, and we were at the Olympics in July. And New Zealand had the audacity to go and participate in a sporting event with the apartheid regime of South Africa. So our leaders rose: Kenneth Kaunda of Zambia, Julius Nyerere of Tanzania, Olusegun Obasanjo of Nigeria. And they said, no, never. We must come together and fight this cause. And that's why we became the pawns. We, the athletes, became the pawns in 1976. And we gave up our dreams, gave up our careers to boycott the Olympics. And down the line, decades later, the results started to show, emanated. But unfortunately, our focus for today, because, I see the world through the prism of sport, and I cannot address what we have just discussed now politically the way you, the experts, would. But looking through the prism of our own sports and our own individual lives, we boycotted. I was one of them. We lost the opportunities, and there were so many of us across 27 countries in Africa, including the greatest of us then were Philbert Bayi of Tanzania. I was telling Doctor about him. He didn't participate. And Charlton Hizwele of Nigeria, who was the best triple and long jumper in the world going to the Olympics, who did not participate, never participated again. And since then, for 47 years, nobody has remembered to even acknowledge the sacrifices that the athletes made. But this is 47 years going, and it has sustained. Africa is not united. Things are even getting worse. Look at Sudan, look at Somalia, look at the Horn of Africa, look at the crisis everywhere. There's a new scramble for Africa by the rest of the world. And we Africans are not coming together. So in Nigeria, we are trying to lay a foundation. We want to revive 1976. Let me go straight to Dr. Minyuku. Your thoughts, just your initial thoughts after listening to that Sermon on the Mount delivered by Mathematica?
Chief, thank you greatly. And I hope I'll do justice to this discussion of today and add a bit of value. But first, I do need, on my behalf and on behalf of South Africa, even though I'm not a government official, I do need to thank you and the 45 others in Nigeria who made the supreme sacrifice for us to be who we are today, to be where we are today, to even think of ourselves as being part of a human rights culture, international human rights culture, and to be part of the world democracies. And that doesn't mean that we have arrived. It simply means that the struggle still continues. But I do need to thank not just Nigeria. As you indicated, there were approximately other 29 countries, even other countries outside of out of Africa, that boycotted the Montreal Olympics of 1976. And I do need to say that on our side, that is actually something that even every South African needs to take cognizance of, and including our government in particular, to recognize those people who made that supreme sacrifice. By the way, that supreme sacrifice also helped South Africa because it ignited the anti-apartheid movement in a very big way internationally. It was because of the actions of those youngsters. I was 26 years then, and I'm 72 years now. But the thoughts are as real as they were now for me as they are today. So I do need to say that struggle makes better people. Look how you turned out, Chief, yourself. And it is because of that very struggle. But you were there even long before 76. We do need to thank every one of them and the journey that you have always been on. The transformative change and development is nation building. You would know even from our own president that they said sports is the greatest unifier of nations. And I'm not surprised that you're still in the thick of it as a sportsman. And when we say mathematical, they need to know that that's how you used to juggle the soccer in the ground better than the mathematicians actually used to do computations. Just for starters, my take to it, and I'm going to yield perhaps for my brother, my namesake as well. My take to what happened in 76 is actually more profound than many people think. Many of us were actually scared to death in South Africa because at that stage, remember, our leadership was in jail. You couldn't even say a thing. Now, at my age at that stage, to know that there were youngsters of my age and even younger who have actually made a supreme sacrifice for South Africa, that conscientized me. It conscientized me even more than I was. It actually pumped me up to be involved in the manner in which I then became involved and internationally involved as well. But because we never talk about ourselves, nobody knows our contributions, just like the major contributions that those athletes sacrificed in Nigeria. I am so proud, not just of yourself as an individual, but of just that thought to rekindle it. And you use the word restitution. It is actually a mental reprieve in order to go towards restitution as a nation.
Wow.
South Africa needs to recognize that. And Africa itself needs to recognize that. In fact, maybe for the first time, Africa would have a psyche that can lead us to a new world order that you're talking about. Basically, the same world order that Professor Lumumba is talking about. Because we have been so pulverized since 1884-85 that we have remained little islands in our own continent, little strangers in our own continent. People need to know that South Africa and Nigeria are holding are two handles of the same basket of wanting to see a better Africa and a better world at that. The youth then were leaders. The youth today, including South African youth, need to be future leaders of the world in order to make sense of the new world order that we are talking about. And I think many of our youth have taken the baton. They are literally working at that against all odds. And we will be talking about that today. So thanks for the opportunity and thanks for even the introduction, because you put it very well. June, it was between June the 16th in South Africa and the 22nd of June, when we call it the Soweto uprising. It's actually the South African uprising, but it kick-started right there. A month and a day later, that's when the Montreal Olympics happened, as you put it, in July. And where are we today? Thanks to your actions. And they may have been innocuous actions for youth at that time, but look where we are. South Africa is on the map because of your actions. And I do thank you on behalf of myself and on behalf of this country where I am now, even as I recognize that I'm an insignificant one of a lot in our country. Thank you, sir.
Humble. Well, we know in Nigeria that humility is the greatest power. You've just demonstrated that now. Thank you very much, Doctor. Dele, your thoughts straight away.
I think you should end the conversation there. You see, whenever I listen to my brother speak, I say, what can I say beyond that? He has spoken, and I've listened and I've heard. The 76 really takes me back to the beginning of my journey, because I was a mere 16-year-old at that point. I remember I was doing my O-levels in that year. But it calls to mind something specific, which was a prayer that our housemaster used to deliver every so often. And it speaks to the issues that we're talking about. And this was the very short prayer. Now, I'm not a religious person, but this prayer always stuck in my head. And for some reason, in this week, it has surfaced in my mind. And it went like this. Lord, teach me to be generous. Teach me to serve you as you deserve. To give and not to count the cost. To fight and not to heed the wounds. To toil and not to seek for rest. To labor and not to ask for reward, except to know that I'm doing your will. That captures the spirit of sacrifice of those athletes. They did not seek reward. It was a sacrifice that was imposed upon them. Yes, they let their dreams go, all their personal ambitions, and as has rightly been explained, it birthed something greater, which was the release of Mandela and the birth of the new South Africa. You see, part of Africa's troubles since the Berlin intrusion is that we don't feel each other's pain. In that moment in 76, those athletes felt the pain of our people in South Africa. And it is when we feel each other's pain that we're able to make the sacrifices. And it's through the sacrifices that we then get the collective motion and movement forward. Without sacrifice, there can never be progress. And it is something that the new generation really have to imbibe. You have to be ready to give something up in order for something greater to be birthed. Now, we heard speak of that word unity and the new world order. And truly, there is a new world order unfolding right now. And we somehow have to position ourselves in order to birth a new future for our people. But we've got to be clear about unity. You see, unity is a lovely, warm, fluffy word. I'm not a conventional Pan-Africanist. I believe in the unity of Africans, but I do not believe in the political unity of Africa. There's the unity of the orange, and you've heard me speak of this so often, and the unity of the apple. As it is in Nigeria, so it is across the continent of South Africa. There are some pushing for the United States of Africa. I'm aware of that. And Professor Lumumba, that you've mentioned, is one who's been a keen advocate of that. But I keep saying, what kind of unity? We want unity with flexibility. We want unity with individuality still preserved. So you have your orange and you peel the skin of the orange. And within, underneath, what you see is the segments of the orange sitting comfortably side by side. And you can pull a segment out individually and it still leaves the rest there. Just like my hand. There's that unity of the fist, the power, togetherness, that's great. But you also need the individuality of the fingers. The thumb can do something that the little finger cannot. And it is that appreciation and celebration of diversity. That's the real unity that we need, not just in Nigeria, but across our beautiful continent of Africa. But as I say, we only get there by imbibing and emulating the spirit of sacrifice demonstrated by those athletes. And the only way that the new generation can be encouraged to make sacrifices when called upon is if we celebrate and remember those who have sacrificed before. Because one of our serious problems is our poor political memory. Our memory is very shallow politically. We forget sacrifices that have been made for us. We forget the journeys of those who have laid the foundations that we stand upon. That's something that the rest of the world do not do. They always remember their heroes. They always remember those who have given something up. We tend to always look forward. But it's Churchill who said, the further back you look, the further ahead you can see. And so we've got to do more looking back. And this exercise in looking back to these 47 athletes who've made the sacrifice is something that we've got to replicate again and again and again. Let's encourage the spirit and the habit of looking back.
Fantastic. Well, Billy, that's more than an intro. At this point, I think we should just end this show. After listening to both you and your twin brother. There's nothing else to say. So we better do some cultural gyration. Let's dance a little. There's this Nigerian artist. He's late now. His name is Sonny Okosuns. For so many years, all his albums, all his music, everything he did was about South Africa. South Africa this, South Africa that, Mandela here, and all the top, Steve Biko and everybody in his songs. And he died just back in South Africa. This is a Nigerian, Sonny Okosuns. Let me entertain Dr. Minyuku with one of Sonny's, masterpieces. It's called Papa's Land. So let's listen to that. And when we come back, we'll continue with our conversation. This is Mathematical, 90 minutes with Mathematical from Eagle 7 Sports Radio. Wherever you are listening to us or watching us around the world, I'm having a conversation here with two Dele Oguns, one in England and the other in South Africa. And it's been truly enriching just listening to them. Well, without question, there is a new scramble for Africa. There is a scramble for our resources. And the architecture of this world, the way it is today, is not designed so that we would succeed or we would thrive. It is not designed at all for us to succeed or thrive as Africans. And throughout history, the evidence is everywhere. Now there's a new scramble for Africa. And we were speaking of unity. Me, I don't like that word unity. Just as, Dele pointed out, particularly when it is political. How do you unite? We haven't succeeded. The evidence is around that we haven't succeeded through all of these years. When you say unity, people think of, just this crystallization, this binding together, you are one and all of that. What should exist would be brotherhood, a friendship, collaboration. You are doing integration. You are doing things together. And that's what we have set out to achieve through the Nigeria Institute of International Affairs, which is a government institution, the foremost government institution for the establishment of policies in Nigeria for international relations. And that's the foundation, that's the anchor of the project we're on. And the tools we want to deploy, which I will want you to comment on, are not the hardcore tools of politics or economic development or technology and all of that, but the soft power tools, soft power diplomacy that you cannot stop. You talk about sports, you talk about music, you talk about the arts, you talk about film, you talk about entertainment, you talk about fashion, you talk about our culture. This coming together cannot be stopped by anybody because it is a celebration of all of those arms of our humanity. And we did it once in 1977. That's why it's good to go back into history. In 1977. For the first time in our history as Black people, 58 countries, 58 Black and African countries came together in Nigeria, funded by the government of Nigeria, in the largest congregation of the Black race ever in history, to come and celebrate in dance and drumming and art and culture and all of that. It never happened again. But that was a perfect opportunity for us to have sat on a table and had a conversation beyond the cultural dancing and singing and to determine which way forward. That was a perfect opportunity. So we need to recreate such opportunities again, such platforms again, using not the hardcore diplomacy, but soft power diplomacy. The foundation will be laid on the 28th of July in Lagos, Nigeria, when we go back to 1976 to go and start this conversation, we are using this as a starting point to birth something that is bigger and better. Probably the biggest project ever undertaken by the Black race in history. July 28, 2023. Doctor, your thoughts?
Chief, I think that is a fantastic idea. And maybe even to use the word fantastic is not doing it justice. It is a high time that we create platforms that can bring Africa together. And before I pivot into this particular thought, allow me, Chief, please, to just do justice. Yeah, let me just do justice to one thing so that I transition better, mentally and otherwise. The supreme sacrifice that you're talking about, I just wanted to say that it undergives what happened in 1976. If you look at the international community, it tells you that only about 176 youth made a sacrifice in South Africa. In other words, they say they died. No, we are talking about 20,000 youth and families, many of whom still don't know where their children are today, who made that supreme sacrifice for us to be where we are today. So many people just think that June the 16th was a riotized day. No. That was the time to literally change our mindsets. I wanted to say that in order to pivot to what you were saying now, even to the New World Order, more fundamental beyond what South America is now doing, because of course they want to move away from the dollar. More than just what BRICS is doing, more than just what perhaps even Russia and those countries around Russia are doing, because all of them are positioning themselves for the New World Order.
Yeah.
The word I like in line with what you said, it's a phrase, it's not a word. It's literally what is down at the soul of Africa. We must rekindle our psyches. Even country-wise, we do not have national psyche. And what is a national psyche? It speaks to the soft, the little capillaries, if there were rivers in a country, that actually gives lives to the people. Even in South Africa, we don't have a national psyche. Even in Nigeria, you don't have a national psyche. The arts, the sports, the music, and everything else are these capillaries that I'm talking about. These rivulets that actually give life to any nation. And even if we were to piggyback on what my namesake has said, it is still the same thing, because to eat is politics, to drink is politics, to sing is politics. You need to be very proud of your own culture in order to understand that you can give meaning to the next person. Now, we need, and I'm not saying that we are a monolithic society in Africa, which makes sense of the orange philosophy and metaphor that my namesake is talking about all the time. But to bring action to that, he showed you a fist. I mean, even the fingers of the hand are not equal, as he said. Though from a South African perspective, we talk about the die confluence. And the die confluence is not about dying for an individual. It is the issue of diversity. It is the issue of inclusivity. It is the issue of equality, even of opportunities, of even being at the Olympics. But it sounds small, but that's what makes us alive. So we need to make sure we have national psyches, and that would make us conquer the greatest enemy within ourselves. And you quoted Steve Biko. He does say that the greatest weapon in the hands of the oppressor is in the mind of the oppressed. Now, imagine that we've been oppressed since 1884, and we are now here. We are still saying we are not together. Fast track to the 1977 gathering that took place and what happened out after it. We all just got focused on our tunnel visions rather than to build on that. So I'm saying the first thing we need to do is to capture those soft things that you're talking about. They are literally not soft. They are necessary evils for us to bring Africa together. Even if you were just to say sport, the CAF competition are just around the door, but do we hardly ever talk about ourselves, even when we do that? We don't. Do we hardly ever talk about what happened with the supreme sacrifice that has happened, not just in South Africa, but throughout Africa? We don't. And that's because we don't act. Now, the orange philosophy that he's talking about makes sense when we act on it and when we put a power punch on it. And that can happen without us even wielding our fists to anybody but to ourselves.
Yeah.
And that's when we say power to the people. So this is crucial, what you're talking about. Very crucial. Because sometimes we think we can make mountains. That's wishful thinking. To think that you can make that mountain move. And wishful thinking leads to no wish fulfillment. But the reality is that you just said July, you gave a date.
Yeah.
And said 2023.
28.
28.
Yeah. July 28, 2023. Yes.
You see, that date, if you were to just call it a cultural movement, people will flock. But that's not what you're saying. You're just giving examples of these capillaries that makes us actually think together, including the fact that the Nile River actually is flowing up all the way from the south. We can even follow it and we'll end up in Nigeria. But we never think about that. So my thoughts are, you are on the right trajectory. And sometimes we need to actually say to our politicians, whilst politics is everything, many of our politicians are really not politicians. They are apolitical because they are looking at what is in their personal interest rather than to build our nations. I will park it right there.
Enough for me to take home and digest for the next few weeks. You have given me enough materials to go digest for the next few weeks. Dele, do you have any thoughts on that? And in addition to that, Dele, what I want you to now expand on, there's this small incident, very small incident in Europe in the past couple of weeks with this black Brazilian football player, Vinicius Jr., that has sparked off something within European football. It is about racism rearing its head again. The guy has raised his voice. A few people have raised their voices, but this is something that affects the totality of us. I don't know our population in the world now, as blacks and as Africans and as peoples of African descent. Can you imagine, were we to be united, for us all to now raise, to say something out in one voice against what Vinicius has just happened to Vinicius, the world would take notice. Now he's saying it alone, and a few other people are joining him to say it. He's in limbo. He's bearing the pain as an individual himself, whilst the rest of us are pursuing other interests. Our politicians are pursuing their pockets. Our young ones don't know anything. They are chasing how to leave their continent and go to Europe to go and enjoy life, and so on and so forth. But speak to those two issues, Dele.
Thank you so much. First of all, Chief, you can see why we have to get Dr. Minyuku to Nigeria. We've got to get him home. Our people need to hear him live. They need to feel him, feel those words as they come from him, the wisdom, the philosophy. Let me comment on what I've heard. And it does tie into this latest outrage that you've just touched upon. A star footballer, a gift to mankind. Can you imagine? You could almost juxtaposition mathematical being put in that position on the field of play. And that insults. Because an insult to one like us, one of those like us, at the highest level, is an insult to all of us. We're back to that almost boycott moment again, where I would have loved to have seen the leading black players, because they are the ones who actually make global football right now. What would English football be without our young men who are donning the shirts of Arsenal? Bukayo Saka, for example. What would Arsenal be? What would all these Premier League teams be? It is the flair, it's the magic, it's what the African dimension that we bring to the game that has brought the revenues in. They know that. This is why they scour the world for our talents. And yet moments like that come and the insult starts again. We have to use what we have. You must use what you have. Define your strength. Our strength in Africa is the sports, the music. That's what it is right now. That is what we have to use. And if our leading sportsmen, our leading footballers, Premier League players, all stood down and said, we ain't playing this week, we're boycotting the whole show, what a signal that will send. But I don't hold the footballers and the athletes alone responsible. They can't do it by themselves, because it all flows back to the image that our political class convey. Because if our political class were doing what they're supposed to be doing, raising our profile, our dignity, such indignity would not be inflicted on any black man in any circumstance. Because if you are winners on the political stage, you are winners in every other aspect of life. So unfortunately, as I say, we are where we are. We've got to use what we've got in order to advance ourselves. And what is it that we have? It is what you have defined as the soft power. It is our athletes. It is our musicians. I was in the Caribbean on a cruise recently, and as we landed in each island, what was I hearing? Afrobeats. Whether it was Barbados, whether it was Guadeloupe, it was Afrobeats that I was hearing. These are the ones carrying the flag for us right now. It is our sportsmen, it is our musicians. And so therefore we have to build the new Africa on that solid base. Take that as the base and build the politics from there. So you build to your strength. We must own the sports scene, just as our musicians are owning the music scene. We must revive our clubs. We must revive our football clubs. It cannot be that, like all our lawyers, doctors, they can only find fulfillments abroad. We have to create the environment. And this is a message to our political class, the new regime, if you like, the new administration that's coming in. You've got to build from your strength. Everybody does it. If you're going into business, if you're starting up an enterprise, just as the new administration is starting now, You have to sit back and think, what is our USP that we can build for? What is our unique selling point? And the reality is that the unique selling point that we have right now lies in our field of sports and music. That is
fashion and film and the arts and poetry and literature.
Absolutely. As an extension, these are unique to us, and we must harness it. Don't let it flow out. This is the African tragedy. We've always been a repository of raw materials for others to refine and polish and sell at the highest value. We are that mind.
Well, we have a few minutes to go, but I would have to give you the opportunity, Doctor, even if we need to extend by a few minutes, I will have to give you the opportunity to sum up your thoughts generally and leave a message for the rest of us in Africa, something to take away with as we go away from today's show. Your final thoughts.
Chief, thank you greatly. And very quickly, just a friendly addition to, and that's my final thought as well, to what
Take your time and go on. Take your time and go on.
You think, think about this. 9 out of 11 active players in the French national team are African. And as he says, you go everywhere else in Europe, the best players are from Africa. And yet, we don't have a hall of fame for African players in Africa. Even for musicians, even for sports luminaries like yourself, mathematicians, we don't have a hall of fame for them. We have Nobel Peace Prize winners. We don't have a hall of fame for them in Africa to motivate our youth. Come to the youth. I speak to youth in South Africa and say, who are the youth luminaries that we have? Many South Africans, I don't speak ill of them. This is a fact. You ask them, who is the youth in South Africa that is named, a planet is named after him? They won't tell you it's Siyabulela Kuha. They don't know, because we have not harnessed, as my namesake is saying, the assets that we have to be very proud of them as South Africans. Who designed the national orders in South Africa? Is Gift Mameza. And we don't know, and he's a young fellow. When we give you the Order of Lituli, or the Order of the Friends of O.R. Tambo, he designed all those orders that we give to the world. And many young South Africans don't even know. I can go on and on and on. But I'm saying, here's the message for everybody in Africa. The future belongs to the youth. We actually are probably just messing it. Now, let's make sure that we put them at the center of our transformative change and development. But these youth themselves have to raise their fingers, not their hands, their fingers, and say, I can play soccer, or I'm interested in math and science, or I'm interested in astronomy. And that's how we actually can help to build Africa. I have spoken. Start with this project that you have started with. And I'm saying, why should we go and be Hall of Famers? 2 South Africans, Ace Nswelingwa in soccer, and the owner of Kaiser Chiefs are in the Hall of Fame in the US. We don't have a Hall of Fame in South Africa to be able to celebrate our luminaries and be proud of that. And there is a lot where that came from, including in Nigeria. You are a perfect example of that. And let's be mathematical about it. Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor. Thank you, Doctor. Well, I will cede the floor to Dele Ogun to round up your thoughts for today.
Oh, well, it's very simple. We have to bring my brother my namesake, Dr. Biki Minyuku. We have to bring him home. The philosophy, we need cross-fertilization of ideas between the west of Africa and the south of Africa. If Africa is to position itself as the new world order is unfolding, it's like a game of musical chairs. The music has started again. It's an opportunity for us to get it right. And it's only by bringing our thinkers, as you have done mathematically this morning. You brought the thinkers from South Africa together with the thinkers from London, together with your good self on the ground there. It is possible. And I thank you for this opportunity to share thoughts this morning. Fabulous event.
Wow. Well, I'd like to thank you on behalf of all Nigerians, on behalf of all Africans, for your words this morning, words of wisdom. And I want to assure Dr. Minyuku that he just prophesied. He just said something that was already beyond prophecy. It is now actuality. On July 28, 2023, there is a wall under construction now, a wall in that institution that is for international affairs in Nigeria. That wall would contain the names of the 45 plus 22 others, 45 plus 22 others, written in gold, forever, titled the Wall of Fame, and it will remain there for the rest of eternity, showcasing the sacrifice of young people who did not even participate in the sport, who just laid an example in their sacrifice, not for themselves, but for another. What greater sacrifice is there? So that is coming up. Secondly, you also prophesied, and I'm not a religious person at all, like you, but I believe in the power of the spoken word. We are going to invite Dr. Minyuku to Nigeria. Somehow I'm going to work it out that he's going to be part of the conversation, of the actualization of this grand design that we have as to how we can make the black race to sit at the table of civilizations, not as waiters, but as co-diners, in the words of Patrice Lumumba. On that note, on Eagle 7 Sports Radio this morning, I want to thank you for joining me in this conversation and to wish you all a fantastic weekend. And I'll see you again next Saturday. Bye for now.